She was barefoot, bleeding, and one breath from death when she reached the cabin. "You can have me," she said, her voice breaking in the blizzard. "Just don't shut the door." The cowboy didn't speak, didn't move, just stared and stepped aside. But as the snow settled and her body finally collapsed by the fire, she saw them. Bootprints. Fresh, deep. Not hers, not his. Someone else had followed her through the storm. And they hadn't come for shelter. The wind screamed like it had teeth. Snow sliced sideways across the high pass, whipping at the woman's bare legs and peeling the heat from her skin one ragged breath at a time. Her dress, once cream-colored, hung in frozen strips, soaked through and stiffening. Each step left blood in the snow her soles had split hours ago. She hadn't meant to cry anymore, but her throat cracked from the effort of not sobbing. Only one word remained in her chest like a nail, "Please." Before we show you why a silent cowboy opened his door to a dying stranger, what secret burned inside a letter that never reached its name, and how a single stand in the snow shook an empire built on debt and fear, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. These aren't just tales, they're living testaments to mercy, defiance, and the thin line between law and justice that history tried to erase. Your support keeps these echoes alive. One click helps us ride farther, dig deeper, and give voice to the stories chains were meant to silence. Thank you. The ranch sat like a memory against the mountainside, half buried beneath drifts that clung to its wooden ribs. Smoke lifted from the chimney in a single desperate line, drawn straight up into the bruised sky. She didn't notice the horses in the corral or the fresh axe marks on the stump, only the door. That door. She stumbled toward it with the unthinking urgency of a moth to fire. The door opened before she touched it. He stood there, broad shoulders silhouetted against amber firelight, a rifle in his hand, barrel aimed low but firm. No coat, no hat. Just steady breath rising from a stone-cut face as silent as the mountain itself. His eyes locked onto hers. No surprise, no pity, just wait. She fell to her knees. "You can have me," she rasped, arms slack at her sides. "Just don't shut the door." The wind caught the words and flung them back in her face like a punishment. He didn't answer, didn't blink. The rifle didn't lift. Instead, he stepped back, one slow, deliberate step, then another. The door remained open. She crawled forward like it might still vanish, her palms pressed into snow crusted with her own blood. A moment later, heat reached her fingers, the dry, aching burn of hope. Inside, the hearth crackled. She crossed the threshold on her belly and collapsed onto rough planked floorboards. The fire snapped, the wind shrieked, and the door stayed open. He watched her from the far corner. Set the rifle against the wall, then moved to the fire, stoking it with a fresh log. He didn't speak, didn't offer a hand, but he didn't shut her out. She tried to sit up, teeth chattering now that her body had permission to feel again. "Why?" she whispered. He didn't turn. Outside, the wind howled louder, as if angry it had been denied its kill. But it wasn't the wind that made her turn her head. Tracks. In the snow. Behind her own. Deeper, heavier, not there minutes ago. Her breath caught in her chest like a bullet. Someone had followed her. The cowboy's eyes met hers, reading the fear before she could speak it. He moved to the window and pulled aside the curtain just enough to see. No words. But he reached for the rifle again. And this time, he loaded it. Then the fire cracked louder, as if sensing what was about to come. The saloon at Bent Gulch was barely more than a lean-to slapped against the bones of a way station. Dust and steam curled from the bodies inside, clashing with the snow that clawed at the windows. Men hunched over their drinks, boots dripping, pistols visible, tempers curled tight from the cold. Outside, the last rail engine of the week groaned westward, its whistle trailing into dusk like a ghost scream. Honora kept to the back, face in shadow, scarf drawn high around her jaw. Her coat was stitched in 3 different threads, and her boots had long since split at the heel. She held her cup like it might disappear if she blinked. No one looked her way twice. Just another winter stray, a girl out of place. But her ears were sharp. They had to be. 2 men by the stove were talking low. One of them, the taller, with a broken tooth and a voice like rust, spoke of a homestead past the ridge trail. "Ain't no woman up there, ain't no anything really, just him. Quiet fella, don't talk, don't turn folks out neither." The other chuckled. "Dead wife'll do that to a man. More like Dead Town. He was cavalry once. Keeps his own law now. You show up dyin', he don't ask." Honora didn't flinch, but her pulse shifted. The cup trembled just enough to send a ripple across the surface. She steadied it and looked down. They kept talking, words blurring into background noise, but she already knew. She wouldn't make it another night sleeping beneath freight cars, dodging syndicate men and bounty hunters who called her theft what it wasn't. The man she'd fled claimed ownership of her like she was an invoice. Said she owed him more than her body could pay. When she cut the bonds and took the mare, he'd called it criminal. A runaway, a stolen horse. But she hadn't stolen freedom. She'd just finally stopped asking. And now they were close. She'd seen the same 2 men pass the station platform that morning, one of them holding her sketch, the ink still damp. She had one thing left. From the pocket of her coat, she pulled a small silver ring, its edges dulled by years of wear. The initials were faint now, S.J., but her thumb knew them by touch. She walked up to the bar. The barkeep eyed her like a nail he wasn't sure fit the board. "Where's the nearest trader with a saddle horse?" she asked, voice stripped raw. "You got coin?" "I got this." She set the ring on the counter. The barkeep leaned in. Read the initials. Didn't ask questions. "That'll ride you to the edge of the world," he muttered, and nodded to the stable hand near the rear exit. She turned without another word. The camera would stay, would hold just a beat longer on the ring, cold against the wood, the letters catching firelight, S.J. And outside, snow began to fall in earnest, swallowing her tracks before they could harden. The last steps had become guesses. Her vision blurred from cold and exhaustion. Honora couldn't tell if she was walking or simply falling forward, over and over, willing her body to move through a wind that bit like broken glass. When the outline of the cabin finally emerged from the whiteout timbers dark against the pale storm, it didn't feel like salvation. It felt like a hallucination. The last cruel trick of the cold. She made it to the porch with the last flicker of strength her legs could muster. One bootless foot slipped on the frozen plank, and she went down hard, her shoulder hitting the post. Her hands were too numb to catch her. She didn't cry out. Couldn't. Her throat had iced over hours ago. She simply lay there, curled in on herself, half-conscious and ready for the dark. Then the door opened. A man stood framed by firelight and smoke, motionless. No greeting, no alarm. Just the weight of his presence pressing against the threshold. His face was worn, not old. The kind of face that had survived more winters than it wanted to count. His hands didn't tremble on the rifle he held. His breath didn't catch. She looked up at him from the boards, blinking snow from her lashes. "Please," she whispered, lips barely parting. "Please don't shut the door." He didn't speak. For a long, frozen moment, he didn't move at all. Then, slowly, he set the rifle against the wall. He stepped into the storm and scooped her into his arms like she weighed nothing. Her body folded against his chest. She caught the scent of smoke and horsehide, and something colder beneath it, something sealed and grief-bound. He didn't grunt or strain. He carried her like a duty long delayed. Inside, the warmth hit like fire. Her skin screamed as the nerves woke back up, but she couldn't make a sound. Her body jerked in his arms as if rejecting the sudden mercy. He laid her down on a thick wool blanket near the hearth. Flames danced in the stone fireplace, throwing orange light across the cabin walls. Sparse, clean, built for one. He knelt, took her foot gently in his hand, peeled back what was left of her sock. The skin beneath was white, blistered in patches, toes blue at the edges. She winced. He didn't stop. A basin of warm water appeared. Bandages, salve, all without a word. She tried to speak. I can pull my weight," she said hoarsely, trying to prop herself up. He didn't look at her. "I know what this is," she added. "What it costs. I'm not afraid." Still nothing. He dipped a rag into the water and dabbed gently at her heel. I'll do what's expected." That made him pause. He sat back on his heels, looked at her. Really looked. Not with hunger, not with pity. Just something flat and ancient and unreadable. Then he stood. He turned and walked out of the room. The door stayed open. Not the front one, the one to the hallway. But the meaning was clear. She lay there, blinking into the fire. The pain in her feet slowly drowned beneath the deeper ache rising in her chest. He hadn't touched her, hadn't asked her name. But in the quiet of that room, wrapped in silence and flame, she realized she didn't feel owned. She felt seen, and that scared her more than anything. The wind had died sometime before dawn, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than the storm. Snow blanketed the world outside the cabin in an unbroken sheet, save for the thin line of smoke rising from the chimney. Inside, the fire still burned low, casting shadows that moved like restless spirits along the log walls. Honora sat upright on the cot, her legs covered in thick wool, her feet wrapped in bandages that itched and throbbed. She had slept in fits, jolting awake at every creak in the floor or snap in the fire. Not from pain, but from the certainty that someone would come. And they did. The knock was not gentle. 3 sharp raps, intentional. Like a man declaring ownership of the space before being invited inside. Calder had been sitting in the corner, sharpening a knife without urgency. At the sound, he stood without pause and crossed the room to the door. He didn't take his rifle, just opened it. 3 men sat on horseback, steam rising from their nostrils, horses and men alike. The one in the middle wore a duster stained with road grime and pinned with a tin badge not issued by any marshal's office. It bore the mark of the Delancey Syndicate burned into the metal with ornate arrogance. "You got a girl in there," the lead man said, not bothering with pleasantries. "We've been sent to collect." Calder didn't answer. The man gestured behind him. "She's property. Stolen. Debt wife. Ran out on her binding. Belongs to Mr. Thorne, by law and by ledger." Honora's breath caught. She eased herself to the edge of the cot, gripping the edge of the blanket like it could change what was outside. The second rider, younger, with cold eyes and a scar across his lip, held up a leather satchel. It jingled with coin. "Gold's clean. We take her. You get paid for trouble. No questions." Still nothing from Calder. The leader's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Or you can keep her, makes you an accessory. We've got rope and jurisdiction." "This isn't a negotiation, it's a courtesy." Honora pulled herself to her feet, stumbling toward the door. "He's not with me," she said, voice trembling. "He doesn't owe me anything. He didn't know who I was. I just showed up. Let me go and leave him be." The third rider, quiet until now, leaned forward in his saddle and spat into the snow. "If that's true," he said, "then he won't mind if we take you." She froze. Calder didn't move. Just stared at them, expression carved from stone, arms at his sides. Then he shut the door, not hard, but final, the kind of shut that ends conversations. He turned back toward Honora, who stood shaking in the middle of the room. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "They'll come in." He nodded once, calm, resigned. As if he'd been expecting this since the snow fell. She looked at the window, half expecting to see the barrels raised already. "What are you going to do?" she asked. Calder walked to the fireplace, picked up the rifle, checked its chamber. His answer was silence, but it said everything. Outside, bootsteps thudded onto the porch. Then a second knock louder, and no more courtesy. The door gave way with a single boot to the hinges. Snow followed the men in, swirling through the threshold like a second wave of threat. The three riders entered fast and practiced backs to the wind, guns already drawn. Calder hadn't moved. He stood near the hearth, rifle in hand, but it hung low, not aimed. His face held nothing but stillness, and that, somehow, made them more wary. The leader coat, now flecked with melting snow, gestured with the barrel of his revolver. "Step aside." Calder didn't. The second man moved toward Honora, rope in hand. Her feet tangled as she tried to back away, heart hammering loud enough she thought it might be heard. The younger one caught her by the arm, yanked her forward. She fought, kicked, but the cold had left her weak. Her wrists were bound before she could even scream. They forced her down to her knees in the center of the room, near the rug. "She ain't yours to protect," the leader said, turning his eyes on Calder. "You're not part of this deal, just a stranger with a warm fire." Still, Calder said nothing. "Hell, maybe you want the gold and the girl, that it?" The man crouched beside Honora, his breath sour with chew. "She'll run again. They always do. That's what fear does, it forgets who fed it." "Let me go," Honora hissed. "If you take me, it proves nothing. I'll die before I go back. You want that blood on your hands?" The man only laughed, but it was Calder's voice that broke through the room like a bullet. "She stays." The air cracked. All three men turned. Honora froze. It was the first time she'd heard him speak low, sure, like the earth itself had finally decided to answer back. The leader stood, eyes narrowing. "You got a badge I missed? You a judge now, mountain man? Or just another fool who likes a pretty face too much to know what's his and what ain't?" Calder didn't blink. "She asked to stay warm. She's under my roof. That means something out here." "That mean you'll shoot us for her?" "No," Calder said. "It means I'll bury what's left." The younger man shifted nervously, his fingers twitching near his holster. The third man, silent until now, muttered, "He's bluffing. No one throws down over a runaway." But the leader wasn't so sure. He studied Calder's face like a gambler trying to read a wall. Honora looked from one to the other, heart thrumming. "I'm not worth dying over," she whispered. Calder didn't answer her. He only stepped closer, placing himself between her and the men. Outside, the snow began to fall again, slower now, but steady. It built up around the hooves of their horses, settled on the empty saddles, began to erase the tracks that led there. The leader tilted his head. "All this silence," he said. "A man who won't speak must be hiding something." But maybe it wasn't shame behind Calder's quiet. Maybe it was something older, something earned. "Now you tell us, should one man defy the law for a stranger's plea, or does silence mean guilt that hasn't yet been punished? Tell us below, what would you have done?" The cabin had grown quieter since the riders left. No one spoke of it, not even with their eyes. Calder resumed his work, chopping wood, checking traps, stitching a broken leather strap, and Honora remained indoors, footbound and weary, watching the smoke rise from the chimney like a slow confession. He didn't speak again after that standoff. Not to her. Not to himself. And maybe that was why she started to drift toward the edges of his silence. Wondering what filled the space where words should have been, she woke in the middle of the night to cold. Not from the weather, the fire still glowed with slow-burning logs, but from the sense of something unfinished. Calder's bedroll near the far wall lay undisturbed. He was gone. Honora wrapped herself in a thick blanket and hobbled to the hearth. The stove door hung slightly ajar. A few ashes drifted lazily on the updraft. Something caught her eye inside an edge of paper, half burnt but not gone. She pulled it out with the tongs, careful not to crumble it entirely. The writing was blurred where the ink had run, but enough remained. Sarah Jane? I was wrong to leave. If you'll let me back. No signature. Just that single torn plea. The rest had gone to cinders. Honora stared at the name. Sarah Jane. The initials matched the ring she had traded, S.J. The one the bartender said would ride her to the edge of the world. She suddenly saw herself not as a stranger in his house, but as a shadow stepping into a hollow already carved by someone else. This wasn't just a man who kept to himself. This was a man who had buried something and kept the grave warm. When Calder returned just before dawn, snow crusted in his beard. She didn't speak. Not at first. He removed his coat, hung it near the fire, and started to unlace his boots. I found the letter, she said. He stopped. His shoulders didn't drop, his hands didn't clench, but something in him paused in a way she could feel from across the room. I wasn't looking to pry, she added. But it wasn't ash yet. It didn't want to be. He turned then. His eyes didn't accuse, didn't harden. They just looked tired. Sarah Jane, she said softly. She was yours? He nodded once. Honora held the half-burned page up to him. You wrote it, but you never sent it. His throat worked around words that didn't come easy. Then, at last, his voice low, sanded down by years of misuse. I kept the fire going every day for her, he said. Even when it stopped meaning anything. The silence afterward wasn't empty. It was full of something unspeakable, regret that had turned to routine. Hope worn into habit. Honora looked at him and saw not a savior, not a rescuer, but a man trying to keep a promise that no one was left to hear. She realized then, he hadn't opened the door for her out of mercy. He'd opened it because he didn't know how to close it anymore. He hadn't saved her. He was still trying to save himself. The crunch of hooves came at midday, slow and deliberate, one rider, not three. The sound echoed through the valley, crisp against the stillness, too steady for a drifter, too official for a bounty hunter. Honora was kneeling near the hearth, feeding the fire with careful hands, her feet still wrapped in Calder's precise bandaging. She froze, fingers paused mid-motion, a sixth sense prickling across her spine. Calder was already standing at the window, jaw clenched. This time, he didn't reach for the rifle. The rider came alone. Not one of Thorne's syndicate men. She rode with posture, not swagger, and wore a long gray duster lined with federal insignia. Her hat was wide-brimmed but regulation, her saddle marked with a star etched into the leather flank strap, a U.S. Marshal. She dismounted without waiting to be met. Walked straight toward the door, like the land itself answered to her boots. When Calder opened it, they stood facing each other. No words at first, just the long gaze of people who've seen the same wars from opposite ends. Captain, she said. The word didn't echo. It landed like a weight. Honora stood slowly behind Calder, eyes narrowing. The marshal didn't look at her right away. She kept her focus on the man before her. I'll be brief, the marshal continued. I'm not here for trouble. I'm here with warrant and writ. Thorne's claim is legally binding. She's catalogued as debt-bound under Federal Annex 5. Unlawful flight, interstate evasion. You know what that means. Calder said nothing. The marshal glanced over his shoulder into the cabin. She's young, I get it. We all want to save something. But law's law. You taught that to me once. You were a lieutenant, Calder said finally. His voice was flat, but there was an edge to it now, dry steel behind the silence. The marshal's mouth twitched. And you were my CO. That was another life. No, Calder said. It still is. A long pause stretched between them. The snow had stopped falling, but the sky hung heavy, like it might change its mind. The marshal stepped back, reaching into her coat slowly. No threat, just a folded set of documents, creased but dry. "I've got orders. You have 30 minutes. I take her back, or I mark you down as obstruction. That's a federal charge now, not syndicate." Calder didn't take the papers. Honora stepped forward. "You don't have to." But Calder raised a hand, silencing her with nothing more than the motion. He looked back at the marshal, then down at the writ. His lips parted, but the words didn't come. "You still think silence is safer," the marshal said. "But if you'd ever spoken up sooner, they wouldn't have buried your name with the rest of that platoon." Honora looked at him then, not the cowboy who had saved her, not the quiet man behind the rifle, but the soldier beneath it all. A man who once carried rank, and now lived without voice, because what he'd seen or done had no language left in it. He had power now. If he spoke, if he invoked his rank, he could stop this. But the silence was more than habit. It was penance. The marshal stepped off the porch. "You've got until sundown, Captain," she said. "After that, I follow orders, even if they used to be yours." She mounted her horse and rode off, not far, just enough to wait. And inside the cabin, the fire flickered like it, too, was waiting for him to decide if it would burn or go cold. By sundown, the snow had quieted into a hush that blanketed more than just the valley. It smothered the boundary between what was law and what was right. Word had spread fast, as it always did in the high country. A marshal at Calder's cabin, a girl from the syndicates, a man who used to give orders now holding on to silence like a shield. The townfolk gathered without being asked, climbing the ridge that overlooked the homestead, keeping their distance but not their attention. They stood there, boots in snow, arms folded, watching. The marshal waited by her horse, badge glinting in the failing light. Her hand rested on the butt of her sidearm, not out of threat, but to remind anyone who needed it that paper wasn't her only authority. Inside the cabin, Calder stood at the hearth, rifle untouched, eyes dimmed by decision. Honora paced like a trapped animal. "You don't have to do this," she said. "They'll bury you to bury me." He didn't answer. He turned, crossed the room, and opened a small box tucked beneath a floorboard. From it, he took the letter burned on one edge, but still legible where it counted, and the silver ring, faintly engraved, edges dulled by time and heat. He stepped outside. The cold greeted him like an old habit. He didn't flinch. "I have something to say," he called, voice low but strong enough to carry. Heads turned. The marshal raised her chin. "It's too late for—" But he held up the ring. Then the letter, didn't wave them, didn't shout. Just stood there with the two objects in his hands like they were sacred. "This ring belonged to a woman who never came back," he said. "This letter was the last thing I wrote her. I never sent it. Because I didn't know how to say I failed." No one moved. Even the wind had the sense to hush. "I kept the fire going for someone who'd already gone. I opened my door because I was tired of closing it on ghosts. I won't let another woman walk away thinking she's alone." The words weren't loud, but they cracked the silence. From the ridge, an old woman stepped forward, snow crunching beneath her boots. She was the widow of a rancher, known for her steel spine and church-honed stare. She spoke without looking at the marshal. "I saw that girl the night she came through Bent Gulch. She didn't ask for kindness. She just traded something that mattered for a chance to keep breathing. That ain't theft, that's survival." Another man joined her, a blacksmith who'd once fought under Calder's command. "I know what it looks like when a man's hiding guilt, and I know what it looks like when he's carrying grief. I served with him. He never once left a man behind." More voices followed. A merchant, a field hand, a mother, one by one. They stood with their boots in the snow and their truths in the open. They didn't form a mob, they formed a council. The marshal's expression hardened. This isn't a vote. But the people were already moving, circling down the ridge like the land itself had chosen sides. One of them handed Calder a document proof that the man Honora had stolen from had remarried 2 months after she disappeared. No charges filed, no bounty legit. Just syndicate posturing dressed up as justice. The marshal took the paper. Read it. Her jaw tightened. She looked at Calder one last time. I should take you both in, she said. But you won't, he answered. She holstered her weapon. No, I won't. Without another word, she turned, mounted her horse, and rode out through the dusk. Honora watched her go, breath trembling in the cold. You didn't have to do that, she whispered. Calder looked at her, the firelight flickering behind his eyes. Yes, he said. I did. And behind them, the ridge emptied quietly, respectfully, as if the mountain had judged and chosen to let mercy stand. The snow melted slow in the high country, reluctant to let go of the silence it had claimed. But by early April, the streams ran louder, and the ground, once frozen stiff as iron, began to breathe again. Mud replaced ice, buds replaced frost. And the wind, though still sharp in the mornings, no longer carried the bite of survival, only the memory of it. Honora stood in the garden plot behind the cabin. Sleeves rolled past her elbows, hands caked in soil. Her fingers dug careful rows into the earth, not because she'd been taught, but because it felt like something worth learning. She'd bartered with a passing trader for the seeds sage, thyme, and something labeled healing mix in a woman's faded cursive. When the packet tore open in her hand, it smelled like sun-warmed fields and forgotten lullabies. She pressed each seed into the dirt with the reverence of someone who understood what it meant to grow something where nothing had wanted to live before. Inside, Calder was sawing lumber beneath the open window. The steady rhythm of blade through pine filled the space like a heartbeat. Honora glanced over her shoulder, watching as he measured twice, cut once, and then ran his hand along the edge with quiet satisfaction. The desk he was building wasn't fancy, just solid, wide, and facing the window. When it was done, she'd be able to sit and write, the mountain at her back and the garden at her feet. They still didn't talk much, but it no longer felt like absence. It was a language of glances and gestures, of doors left open and water warmed on the stove without being asked. She had stopped flinching when boots crunched outside, and he had stopped counting the days since someone knocked with bad news. They never said forever. Neither of them believed in promises made under pressure, but they didn't speak of leaving, either. The topic dissolved between them like snow on firewood, acknowledged but never lingered on. One morning, a bird built a nest under the eaves of the porch. Honora watched it bring thread and bark, piece by piece, with stubborn patience. Calder paused at the sight, hands on his belt, then nodded once like he approved of its construction. You ever name her? She asked. The bird? No, Sarah Jane. He shook his head. She left before I could give her anything worth keeping. Honora looked down at her hands, dirt under the nails. Well, I'm not leaving, not yet. Didn't ask you to. She smiled, just a little. He looked back to his work. That night, she lit the lantern herself. He placed the desk near the window. They sat across from each other, bowls of stew cooling between them, the silence warm and companionable. Outside, the stars came out without needing to be summoned. And as the voiceover would say, soft and resolute. Sometimes the cold keeps people out, and sometimes it keeps two souls close enough to thaw.